So we are getting started, and welcome to On and Off the Spectrum. I'm Dr. Esty Hess,
And I'm Dr. Ann Kirsch.
and we have a very, very special guest
Yes.
tonight. We have Marissa Cytryn, who is an art therapist. And Ann, you and I were talking about the importance to educate our families in terms of the different types of interventions that are out there that might be, and I'm going to say it's less mainstream, although I don't think it really is. But I do think that there is a general sense of confusion. What is art therapy versus just plain art, or using art in play therapy? And not only are you an art therapist, you're also a DIR floor-time therapy interventionist for children on the spectrum. And I thought we would love to hear your story about how you became an artist and went from art into art therapy, and how that expanded itself into working with developmental delays. And we'd love to just hear from you.
Yes, such a good story, and it's the kind of thing that our listeners would be very interested in knowing about. So,
Well,
the
thank you
floor
for
is
having
yours.
me. Yeah, as you said, I've always been an artist, I guess, just in terms of how I interacted with the world. I always had the drive to create. It's really where I found that I had peace, where I felt focused, where I felt regulated was in painting and creating, collaging, and later making music. But I found pretty early on in terms of pursuing art as a career that as soon as I framed art around um, sharing it for the purpose of supporting myself, selling it, making it consumable, that it really took away a lot of the joy from my art. It really changed the way that I made art. I didn't really like what I made when I was making with that intention. So it brought me to an idea of how can I really use my passion for art and also my passion for supporting people, I just general I guess demeanor in terms of being a good listener, a good regulator, and turning that into a career. And that's really how I found art therapy. Um, Art therapy is right, like you said, it's different than just making art, right? It's about making art within a therapeutic context. So being able to be seen and supported, just like as someone would be with talk therapy or more traditional types of therapy. But art is the means of expression, and it's the container for which an individual is exploring themselves and gaining support as well.
Well, I wonder if you could speak to, for example, um, myself as a play therapist. I may use art as a medium to engage a child in an activity, but I am not necessarily doing art therapy.
Right.
Can you make that distinction?
Sure, sure. And I think that there is a lot of overlap, especially when we're looking at play therapy and art therapy. I think there's a lot more in common than there is differences, in that we're looking at language differently, right? When there's play therapy happening, there's something being expressed and still maybe some material to be analyzed. Um, but art therapy can be differentiated as a modality in and of itself because it has a particular training in a way to frame art as therapeutic material, right? So we're not just doing art in order to engage, and maybe it's a little bit besides the point. Art is really the material of therapy, and it serves a lot of different functions, actually, because art can be used therapeutically in a lot of different ways. In my training, I had two experiences in training that kind of led me down my path. The first was I worked at a center. It was called the Center for Art and Human Development, which was a day program for adults with developmental disability, a lot of adults with autism, but other intellectual disability and developmental disability as well. And the purpose of that program was to build social skills, and also improve self-esteem and autonomy. Those were like the generalized goals of the program. And we did art in groups, in a group therapeutic context. So there was art therapy in terms of visual art. There was also music therapy. There was also drama therapy. So it was like a whole range of expressive art therapies. And what I found there was that there's something inherently therapeutic about making art alongside another person. That being witnessed while creating in itself is therapeutic. And then the other piece of it that I found like a true learning experience was shifting identity, right? That maybe these young adults that were in the program had always identified as someone with disabilities, or maybe they didn't really even have a strong sense of identity because of developmentally where they were at. And creating art was a way to form identity, either understanding yourself as an artist, or just being able to explore your likes and dislikes and your value system through art.
Yes, yes, that's really interesting. Good.
I actually was at I had the high compliment about 2 years ago of going to an art show in Pennsylvania, but all the artists were on the spectrum. And it was such a tremendous sense of pride because here you had a variety of different abilities, both developmentally and artistically, but each one was expressing the best and brightest of themselves as a way to say, here I am. And it was an extraordinary journey, not only to actually visually see the experience, but also to have them explain what it was that was drawn to the particular medium, and a variety, collages and paint media, different oils and watercolors and acrylic and whatever. And it was extraordinary just to be able to really get, as you put, the sense of self based on this wonderful artistic demonstration.
Mm-hmm. And I think that what you're speaking of, being seen, also is really relevant to the play therapy as well, because you're basically creating a safe container for expression that you can be seen, but safely within the safety of this is make believe or this is art,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I think that play therapy and art therapy serve a similar function. And in my work now I'm a clinical program coordinator for a DIR clinic. So I work directly with kids and their families, and I also train staff in the DIR model.
Could you go
And
into that a little bit, because I don't know if our audience really
Yes.
understands fully what
sure,
DIR
yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So at our clinic, we do Floortime, which is a play-based intervention that is informed by the DIR modality. DIR stands for Developmental, Individual Difference, and Relationship-Based Model. And Dr. Hess can sum this up a lot better than I can, I'm sure. But the basic idea is that you're utilizing the developmental level of an individual as well as their individual differences. So their sensory motor processing differences in terms of their communication, trauma, culture, language. I mean, you're utilizing all of those things to form a relationship. And within the safety of relationship, all of those greater skills can be formed. So those social skills, the communication skills, regulation, emotional regulation, and sensory regulation. And so really that's what I do in my day-to-day practice. And my art therapy practice really informs it. I think really like going both ways. And I think there's a lot of overlap in my training as an art therapist, in my training as a DIR interventionist. One, that it's a non-pathologizing model, meaning that it's not looking at diagnoses in particular. It's really seeing a person as a person and an individual. and understanding what their support needs are outside of any kind of label. So that was an approach that I was always really drawn to and always felt, at least philosophically aligned with how I see the world. So,
I love that because
yeah.
there's so much pathologizing that goes on in our field. And
Hmm.
so to hear that you can do this without pathologizing, but you can just be with a person and work
Hmm.
with them, it's just lovely and so helpful.
Yeah, I think that like as a society and as the field of autism and developmental disability support grows, it's moving further and further away from a medical model in some ways because people's understanding and normalizing of neurodivergence has grown. It's I think that a medical model for sure has its place and is super helpful, especially when people are trying to navigate services. But I think that there can be another way too, in order to just incorporate a neurodiversity affirming way of interacting as part of day-to-day life, and that development kind of stems from there. There doesn't need to be a prescription or
Yeah.
something to be fixed, like someone to be cured, but rather supported to live their best life.
Yes, that's perfect because so many people want to have a name on, they want to name what they're doing so that other people can understand it because that's the
Mm.
society that we live in. It's naming things. But to be able to just be and just be be happy and be friendly and be loved and be joyous is what you're talking about being. That's really wonderful.
So, Marissa, I am, I've personally watched your wonderful journey, and I am curious in terms of, you said that it works both ways in terms of your art therapy informing the work in DIR and vice versa. Could you give an example of an experience maybe with a family where, um, you know, to connect with a child who might otherwise have these individual neurological issues or developmental delays, that you use the art as a way to woo them into this interactive experience?
Hmm. I love that question because something that I think is inherently part of art therapy, but I didn't really understand fully until I understood DIR and floor time, is the sensory component of art making, right? So utilizing process over product. That when we're looking to make art, many times it's not to create a picture of something, right? It's about the sensory experience of making. Right? So if we're using a particular medium, like something more fluid, like watercolor or paint, there's a certain freedom in that. There's a certain kinesthetic action in that creation. Versus if we're using something like pen and pencil, there's a certain rigidity and safeness in creating with those materials because there is more control over the outcome. So in working with families, a lot of parents I work with are super invested in their children and want only the best for their kids. And when they're playing, excuse me, my cats are scuttling around.
Oh yes, all of my clients know my cats.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of joy, but what I found is that in supporting their child, they orient themselves a lot about how a child is performing, right? So, what are you drawing a picture of?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what is it going to be? What colors are going to use for the flowers? What colors are you going to use for the sky, right? We're trying to get like maybe some learning happening. But in training parents to let go of the product and just embracing the process, so the sensory enjoyment of creating, the engagement and the fun it brings, that's really where a child then is sharing attention with you and is then able to build all those skills, right? Once you have them in that engagement where their eyes are really bright, they're smiling and loving just being with you, then their brain is open and active to learn. So sometimes it's about reframing the art not as a product, like we're not creating an art product, but we're engaging in an art process together that's fun and stimulatory. Um, and and a lot of my sensory seekers that I work with, kids that need a lot of that sensory input in order to be relaxed and regulated, love engaging with art in that way.
You know what I also heard is that you're doing a lot of parental education,
Mm-hmm.
because you're framing and maybe at the same time supporting what I would guess is kind of a grieving process a little bit. You know what I mean? Because you have families who want to be able to say, oh, you're making a picture of this, because that would be kind of a normative way that we look at an artistic endeavor. And I can put that on the refrigerator and say, my kiddo drew a picture of whatever. And I can't do that right now. Not for this particular child. I have to reframe the way that I am looking at my child's art, and maybe I have to reframe the way that I'm looking at my child. So your subtle redirection of having the parent pay attention more to the sensory experience of the child rather than the label is actually saying we've got to look at your child from this angle, right? And help the parent move beyond the original expectation of what my child would or wouldn't be able to do and perform. So,
Yeah.
bravo on that. I think that's a.
It's very much true. Often parents will want to name the thing, like you said, Marissa. What are you going to make? What color will it be? What will the ears look like? Will it have whiskers? Will it have and children often, I mean, I saw this as a teacher before I became a therapist, and as a therapist, children look dismayed. Because they just want to play. They haven't thought far enough ahead in the process of what they're doing to say to themselves, oh, what am I making, and will it have ears, and will it have, they have crayons or whatever they're drawing with, and they're just sitting down, they're excited, they're happy. And parents can really take, I've seen it so often, can really take, teachers can do it too, take all of that excitement out of what's going on. And so that teaching of, that what Esty said, the teaching of parents is really, really important. And I know I've done that a lot with parents, of how to talk with their children and how not to.
But I think it's also indicative that there's a wider lens and a wider community. There's a way to through the art medium to educate family, to educate educators who I think don't necessarily have it. When you were sharing the story about Anne's original job was as a primary school teacher,
Right.
and I was at a, when I was first starting out in my counseling, and I was seeing a kiddo who I was observing, and in the corner, this was a nursery school, and in the corner there was the aides who would look busily scribbling, you know, a lot of filling in the blanks of what a duck, I guess, was going to look like. And so I just sort of went over and then said, what are you doing? And she goes, I you know, the parents are going to pick up their kids in a few minutes, and that, you know, we got to have a picture of a duck, so I'm coloring it in. Because I said, well, why are you coloring it? Well, you know, the kid went yellow or whatever it was, and we got to make it look like a duck. And
That's it.
And so it's this performance piece that I think we're also addressing. And so really, to your credit, both to the parental and to the education community, of how to really look at kids with all different kinds of skills and challenges in a very different way.
Yeah. I think but what both of you brought up a story for me. Early on, I worked in a day program for kids who were experiencing a lot of different, severe mental health challenges. So a lot of them had trauma and adverse childhood experiences. A lot of had undiagnosed developmental delays. And one individual I work with, she was like a 12-year-old girl. She had a really extreme form of social anxiety. It was expressed in selective mutism. So she spoke only with mom at home and in no other setting. And in my first session with her, she created a peacock. I thought it was such an interesting image for her to create. And then she took feathers. She drew the peacock really, really slowly, really carefully, really intentionally. And then she covered it in feathers. Could no longer see her drawing. She glued feathers all over it. Now, if I was from like an arts educator perspective, maybe I'd offer some correction there, right? Like, let's maybe move the feathers to the side so we can see the peacock and it looks like the feathers are behind him.
Yes.
But in reality, she was telling me who she was in that moment. She was introducing herself through the artwork, that there was someone here, really beautiful, magnificent, behind this wall of feathers. And I really felt in that moment it was an invitation to me to be able to say, oh, here I am. And if I had moved to that place of correction instead of connecting over what she had made, I would have lost that opportunity to really know her in that way. And I try and help parents understand that every opportunity for play is an opportunity to know your child. And if we are too stuck in correction, we're stealing away an opportunity for our children to then be able to explore, experiment, fail, and learn from their experiences. And that's really how people learn instead of in a more, like compliance drill or what have you.
Absolutely. And so what did you do with with the parent in that situation? How did you handle that?
Well, it was a slow process, right? I don't think
Yes.
I handled anything in that particular session,
Right.
but I took it as information, and it was interesting to track the art she made over the course of our work together, because every step, every session became a little bit more and more revealing.
Yes.
And I found that making art was actually just a super supportive way to work with kids with those challenges in particular, that extreme social anxiety, the fear of their voice being heard, because it gave a safe place for them to express without having to use their voice, and valuing the communication, the nonverbal communication that actually develops first and needs to be strengthened before verbal communication can come online.
That's wonderful.
Brilliant. Yes.
Absolutely brilliant. Where do you see art, your art therapy, your work as a DIR floor-time therapist taking you now to the future?
Well, I'm just really passionate about working with families, educating families on DIR and floor time, and working from a neurodiversity affirming place. I think that where there's a lot of work to do with families that have are grieving, like you said, maybe the child that they thought they would have, or whatever societal expectations they brought with having a family. And, it brings me so much joy to continue working with families. And I see myself doing that for a long time, as long as I'm able to sit on the floor with them and
Yes.
feel playful.
Yes, absolutely.
I love it. I tell
We've
you,
talked about this so many times.
it's
Sitting on the floor,
and
playing.
it's what I will tell. It's what I also share when I do my lectures with my clinical crew. I'll say that the reason I go to the gym all the time is, it's one thing to be able to get down on the floor, right? Because that's where kids live, but you got to be able to get back up.
Yes, exactly. And
So-
that gets harder as you get older.
Right.
But if you work all that, if you're aware, like you're talking a lot about, what you're talking about is awareness.
Yes, yeah.
Awareness of child, awareness of yourself, and the more awareness you have of your own body, the more you are able to do what you need to do.
Yes, and it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I think the families, obviously, that you work with and will continue to work with are really getting a gift, because we can feel your passion, just through this wonderful exchange. And we want to thank you so much for coming on with us tonight and giving our viewership an opportunity to understand a different format for working with children on the spectrum, for the differences in terms of how art can be expanded into a very specific medium of connection through art therapy, and how you personally expanded that into a real elaborate network of working with DIR, Floortime, and the special needs community. So we want to thank you. This is Dr. S.D. Hess.
And I'm Dr. Ann Kirsch.
And this is On and Off the Spectrum. Now, we've been told a special message by our social media team for everybody who is interested in messages like what Marissa has been able to share with us today, to go ahead and follow us and to subscribe. And so please do that.
Yes.
And have a wonderful evening.